Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Loving obeisances unto the Supreme Being Vasudeva, who is everything there is. Janmadyasya yato anvayaditaratascha artheshu abhigyasvarat tene brahmahridaya adikavaye muhyanti yatsurayah tejo vari mridam yatha vinimayo yatratra sargo mrisha dhamna svena sada nirastakuhakam satyam param dhimahi. We meditate upon the transcendent absolute being from whom springs forth this universe. He is present in all that exists and yet distinct from everything. He is fully conscious and totally independent. He revealed to the first seer Brahma the import of Vedic wisdom. The material creation, made of threefold gunas, appears in him as though real, like water in a mirage. Being eternally self-effulgent, he is ever free of the illusion Maya of the material world. We meditate upon him, the Supreme Being. Nigamakalpataror galitam phalam shukamukad amrutadrava sanyutam pibata bhagavatam rasamalayam muhuraho rasika bhuvi bhavukaha. O devotees who relish a taste for divine love, Bhagavatam is the fully ripened fruit of the wish-yielding tree of Vedas, flowing as immortal nectar from Shuka Brahma Rishi. Go on drinking this nectar day after day. So now we are into the 13th chapter of the third Skandha of Bhagavatam. Now we have seen Brahma create progeny first by creating in order. First he creates the four sagely boys, Sanaka and so on, and then they are committed to living a lifelong dedication of engaging only in devotion. Then he brings forth Rudra, which is an expansion of Shiva, and then Rudra is asked to do penance. Then he brings forth 9 Prajapatis, who are various rishis such as Marichi, Atri, Bhrigu, and so on. And even they are not engaged in creating more beings. And then finally, after bringing forth all the Vedas and various other bodies of knowledge through the unmanifest form as the 4 quarters, he again brings forth from his own body a male and female form, which are Swayambhuva Manu and Shatarupa, and they engage in procreation, creating 2 sons and 3 daughters, who then bring forth creation. Now, Vidura, having listened to the story, asks the question as to what is the activity that was done by Swayambhuva Manu. Vidura is only interested in seeing how all of this relates to the Supreme Being, and of course Maitreya is also fully devoted to the Supreme Being, and therefore Vidura, who is referred to as Vasudeva Katha Dhritaha, that is, one who is fond of hearing the stories of Vasudeva, he asks this beautiful question. He says, what did the great Raja Rishi or the royal sage Swayambhuva Manu do next? Because he had taken refuge in the Supreme Being as indicated by Brahma, and therefore how did he go about engaging in his royal duties? So Swayambhuva Manu sets the first example of how to be a king by being a royal sage, Raja Rishi, by being fully devoted to the Supreme Being while engaging in his royal duties. And that's why Vidura is asking, how did he go about it, being a devotee of the Supreme Being? Because he says the highest reward of learning acquired by men is to hear the praises of the Supreme Being Mukunda in their heart. He says, whatever we listen to has to be connected to glorifying the Supreme Being. Therefore, he asks the sage Maitreya, what did Swayambhuva Manu do and how did he glorify the Supreme Being through his activities? Vidura is asking, Yat Tadgunanushravanam Mukunda Padaravindam Hridayeshu Yesham. Mukunda is again one who bestows liberation, a name for Krishna. He says, one who glorifies the qualities of Mukunda, the Supreme Being, his lotus feet, Padara Vindam, by keeping them in their heart, he alone gets the highest reward. So, how did Swayambhuva Manu do so? When this question was posed by Vidura, Maitreya was very pleased and he proceeded to answer by saying, when Swayambhuva Manu came into existence with his consort, which is Shatarupa, he bowed respectfully to Brahma and he said, you are my father and you are sustaining all living beings. So please tell how I can be of service to you. I offer my obeisance to you. I find that by discharging what you have prescribed to me, I can be of the right service to everyone. So, Manu here exhibits how a son has to be towards his father because he knows that his father, Brahma, is devoted to the Supreme Being, and therefore, by taking orders from his father, Manu sets the example of how one should be respectful towards one's father who surrendered to the Lord. Of course, there is an example coming later in Bhagavatam of Prahlada, whose father is atheistic and opposed to the Lord, and in that case, Prahlada does not listen to his father but instead goes against his father. So, the higher order instruction is to be devoted to the Supreme Being, and if the father is against it, then the father's instructions or orders can be disregarded as Prahalad did. But here, because Brahma is devoted to the Supreme Being, it is the duty of the son, which is Manu here, to listen to his father. Therefore, Brahma is very pleased and he says, I am pleased that you are having this pure heart and you have surrendered to me and asked me what to do. You're setting the example for how sons should serve their father. So, what I want you to do is go and procreate, create more children with your consort, and thereby engage in the best service, because the best service you can do to me is through governing the people correctly and thereby pleasing Sri Hari, the Supreme Being. He says, Bhagavanste praja bhartuhu Rishikesha anutushyati. It's again a nice verse. It says that the leader of men, his only job is to please the Supreme Lord. Hrishikesha is a name for Krishna, which means one who controls all the senses. So, Sri Hari, who is the Supreme Being, who is the indweller and controller of all the senses, to please him is the duty of the ruler of men. And that's what Brahma tells Manu to do, because he says any other labor that is not meant to please the Supreme Lord is of no use, no avail, because they only are a waste of time. Instead, if they engage in pleasing the Supreme Lord, who is the very form of sacrifice, yajna, then they achieve everything. But if they disregard it, then they disregard their own self. He says, Yesham na tushto bhagavan yajnalingo janardanaha tesham shramohi aparthaya yadatma nadritah swayam. He says, Bhagavan Janardanaha, again another beautiful name for Krishna, one who ends the cycle of birth and death, Yajnalingaha, who's of the very form of sacrifices. To please him is the purpose of all activities. And if we fail to please him and engage in all kinds of busy activities, then we are disregarding our own self. So, this is a beautiful instruction again, and Bhagavatam gives these wonderful prayers and teachings in every narration, which brings us back home that whatever we do here, in this case, it is an instruction to the king Manu, but it can be an instruction to any one of us that any activity we do is meant to please the Supreme Being. And if it is not pleasing the Supreme Being, in other words, if we are not surrendered to the Supreme Being, and if we act out of the false platform of I and mine, then we are disregarding our own true self. And that's the essence of this verse. Then Manu says, listening to his father tell him to act in a way to please the Supreme Lord by ruling the earth. Manu says, but then there's a problem because the earth is now submerged in water. Because we are in the beginning of the Kalpa, and in this beginning of the Kalpa, when this Manu comes forth, he finds that the water is completely covering the earth, and therefore the earth is completely submerged. And so, what can we do to recover the earth? And then, when this is put in front of Brahma, Brahma starts meditating upon it because he recognizes that as I was focusing on other things, because he was engaged in bringing forth the Vedas and various bodies of knowledge and all the rest, but he ignored the fact that earth in this beginning of this kalpa was submerged in water, and therefore he started meditating. And when he was meditating, there came from his own nostril a very tiny form of a wild boar. So, all this is beautifully symbolic too. We'll first look at the story and also then the symbolism behind it. There is a beautiful, tiny, wild boar like creature that comes out of Brahma's own nostril, and this wild boar instantly starts growing in size. It grows to humongous proportions, and everybody is in wonder. Brahma and Manu, who is next to him, the son, and all the rishis. Everyone Brahma has created the Sanaka, the brothers, the first four young sagely boys, then the rishis, Marichi and others, and Manu. They are all in wonder. They say, who is this weird looking creature, and how is he growing so fast? Is it the Supreme Lord himself? And while Brahma was wondering thus, the Lord, indeed it was the Supreme Lord who has taken the form of the wild boar. He grew like a huge mountain, and he let out a huge roar, and instantly everybody recognized that this is the Supreme Lord, and they were all extremely happy to have this darshan, this unique darshan of the Supreme Being Sri Hari in the form of a wild boar called as Varaha. It's a very auspicious form, and this is why we saw already that this kalpa is called Varaha Kalpa, because in this kalpa, the very first avatar or the appearance of the Supreme Being is in the form of Varaha. So Varaha comes forth, and all the rishis start glorifying him in Vedic mantras, and the Lord took all these prayers and then he let out a huge roar once more. And then he started casting his glance everywhere, and his body is described as very shiny, steel like, and with lot of bristles and with white colored tusks. And as a boar, he was disguised, but he was none other than the Supreme Being who represents all sacrifices, yajna, and he went about spelling everything that was there. So, when he was there to recover earth, so he started smelling to find out where the earth is, and then he recognized that it is submerged in the waters in the deluge, and therefore he plunged as it were into the waters, and the waters were terrified, and they prayed, "Protect me, O Lord of sacrifices." They prayed to him, and he cleaved the waters, and he went to their depth, to the fathomless depth of the ocean, and there, shining like radiant, resplendent body, he found that there is a demon called Hiranyaksha who had taken earth and taken it to the depth of the ocean, and therefore, with great fury, he destroyed this demon Hiranyaksha, and then, effortlessly destroying him, he came out from the waters with the earth held on his tusk. And by seeing this glorious sight, all of them who were waiting there, Brahma and all the rishis, glorified him in Vedic mantras. So now, here, this beautiful story is a very auspicious story, and it has deep symbolism too, because Varaha is considered Yajna Purusha, or the symbol of sacrifice, and Hiranyaksha is the demon who has taken earth to the bottom of the ocean. Hiranyaksha literally means one who is interested only in gold or wealth. Hiranya means gold, Aksha means eye, so one whose eye is set only on wealth accrual is Hiranyaksha. So, what this symbolizes is when one is so materially obsessed, then his very world becomes submerged in chaos, and the ocean represents the chaos in which one's world gets plunged. And therefore, when one is exclusively focused on material wealth and ignoring everything else, this is a demoniac tendency, Hiranyaksha, and because of this demoniac tendency, the whole world of this person, whoever is so obsessed, captured by this demon, as it were, his whole world is plunged into the chaos, which is the depth of the ocean. And the only way to come out of it is through sacrifice. One has to engage in sacrificing sensory pleasures and other activities that are only focused on accruing wealth, and that is why Varaha is called Yajna Purusha, or the symbol of sacrifice. When one engages in sacrifice, out of sacrifice, order emerges. Chaos goes away and order emerges. As long as one is caught in selfishness, there is chaos, and when one is engaged in sacrifice, order emerges. So, Varaha represents the very sacrifice itself, yajna, and through sacrifice, this tendency to accrue wealth is destroyed. That's why Hiranyaksha is killed and the world is recovered and set back in order. So that's the beautiful symbolism behind the Varaha avatar, and it's a very auspicious avatar. That's why, because invoking Varaha is to invoke the principle of sacrifice itself, which is the essence of spiritual life. One has to sacrifice whatever is not necessary beyond the basic needs of keeping the body and soul together, as it were, and use the instruments for service of others rather than for one's own gratification. And this principle of sacrifice is Varaha. So it's a beautiful and very auspicious avatar, the very first avatar in this kalpa, and hence it's called Varaha Kalpa. So we can see that the very principle of life itself begins with sacrifice. So when Varaha appears out of the ocean with the earth recovered, that is, with order restored, then all the rishis there are very pleased and they glorify him. They say, "Victory to you, O Lord, O promoter of sacrifices." He says, the rishis say, "Jitam jitam te ajita yajna bhavana." So, "Jitam jitam, victory be to you, yajna bhavana, O promoter of sacrifices, Trayim tanum swam paridhunvate namaha." They say, we offer obeisance to you, whose very body is of the nature of three Vedas. Then they go on to glorify him by saying that every aspect of sacrifice, so yajna at a physical level, is done with a ladle, with ghee, which is clarified butter, with various vessels, with various mantras. And so, symbolically, all of these, the various necessary instruments of sacrifice, are all coming forth from his body. It is said that his very body was giving forth the ladles, the vessels, the mantras, the forms of sacrifice, the procedures to do sacrifice, the various protocols to be followed. Everything was coming forth from his very body, which is again symbolically saying that all aspects of sacrifice are coming from the Supreme Being. So when one recognizes the glory of the Supreme Being, then one can engage in sacrifice in one's own way wherever one is positioned, by using one's position, whether it's at work or at family or society, or as a leader or in any position, to use all the instruments in order to serve and be ready to sacrifice one's own pleasures in order for the greater good. So then the rishis glorify all of this. The rishis glorify this supreme being in the form of sacrifice by saying a beautiful prayer. Finally, they say, "Obeisance to you, O Lord. You represent all the mantras, all the deities, all the materials used in sacrifice, all the sacrificial acts. You also represent the very wisdom that comes through dispassion, devotion, and self control, and you are teacher of all knowledge." It is such a nice verse in the original form. It says, "Namo namaste akila mantra devata dravyaya सर्वकृतवे क्रियात्मने वैराग्य भक्त्या आत्मजयानुभावित ज्ञानाय विद्यागुरवे नमो नमः." Says again that we offer obeisance to you because you are the very form of sacrifice, all mantras, all instruments of sacrifice, and the very dispassion, devotion, and knowledge that is necessary for sacrifice. And therefore, you are the Vidya Guru, the teacher of all knowledge, and you are the very source of all the Vedas, and you've brought forth as your own consort, as it were, Earth, Bhudevi, out of this chaos. And who else can do this except you? Because it is your supreme glory in the form of sacrifice that has restored Earth. And then they finally say that one who seeks to know all your exploits is truly confused, because it's impossible for anyone to know all your exploits, because the Supreme Being is infinite in nature, and to attempt to know him fully is an activity of the ego. That's why the rishis say, as a form of prayer, that one who seeks to even know you fully has verily lost his wits, because it's delusion that makes one want to know you. So this is again an admonition to try to intellectually understand the Supreme Lord without simply surrendering. So this whole prayer again essentially and beautifully glorifies the very act of sacrifice, which is the source of all knowledge, therefore calls him Vidya Guru, the very embodiment of the principle of Guru, the teacher of knowledge. And with this, the beautiful Avatar of Varaha is glorified. And while being thus glorified by the sages, the Supreme Being, who is in the form of Varaha, placed earth in its right place, as it were, and then he simply disappeared. So, this is the whole appearance of Varaha. Of course, later we will see a little more detail on who is this demon Hiranyaksha, who was killed by Varaha, and then his brother, who is Hiranyakashipu. And these stories will be described in more detail as we go forward. But in this chapter, it's a very auspicious chapter because it describes the descent, the avatar of Varaha, who is Yajna Purusha. Vishnu Sahasranama also, that's why refers to him as Mahavaraho Govinda, Sushena Kanakangadi. It's a beautiful name of Vishnu, the Supreme Being, that he is the Mahavaraho Govinda, the great Varaha, who is Govinda, who is also Krishna. Govinda also means one who protects earth. The word go means at least three meanings. There is more. Go means senses, go means cow, and go means earth. So in this context, because he protects earth, he is also called Govinda. So it can refer to both Krishna and Varaha, who are one and the same. And therefore, this verse, Mahavaraho Govinda, Sushena Kanakangadi, is also in Vishnu Sahasranamam. And this Varaha, avatar of Sri Hari, disappears after re-establishing earth in its order. And then, as a way of glorifying this avatar, this chapter concludes by saying that the Supreme Lord Janardana is quickly pleased in his heart by those who listen to or narrate with devotion this blissful and loving story of Sri Hari, the very thought of whom rids one of all sorrows. So, this is what's normally called as Palashruti, that is the fruit of listening to certain prayers or certain stories. It doesn't come in every chapter, but in a few chapters it comes when it's very special, because this chapter is very special in that it's the first account of the avatar of the Supreme Being as Varaha. It says that Lord Janardana is quickly pleased by simply listening to this story with reverence and devotion. So, we are all blessed to listen to this by the grace of Bhagavatam. The verse here beautifully says, Ya eva metam harimedaso harehe katham subhadram kataniyamayanah Shrunavita bhaktya shravayeta oshatim janardano asya ashu hridi prasidati. So Janardana, the Supreme Lord, ashu, instantly, hridi, in his heart, prasidati, is pleased by simply listening to and narrating the story with love. And therefore, Maitreya asks rhetorically, when one who is devoted to this Supreme Lord, our dear Lord, who is so graceful, what is then hard to obtain for one when one pleases the Supreme Being? Therefore, our only purpose is to exclusively devote our mind on Him who is situated in our own heart and who confers His own state to us. It's again such a nice prayer. He says, Ananya drishtaya bhajatam guhashayah swayam vidatte swagatim paraf. He says, when one is with exclusive or nothing else, Ananya means nothing else, with no other thought except devotion to the Supreme Lord. And where is he situated? He is situated in our own heart, Guhashaya. Then what does he do? He says, Swayam vidhatte swagatim paraf. He gives us his own state. He realizes that we are none other than him, and therefore his very supreme state is bestowed upon us by simply meditating upon him in our heart. And therefore, this is the true purpose of all human pursuits. And if one is listening to this, then one can never be satisfied with this, because this is nectar that keeps on giving. So we say always that this is nectar from Shuka Maharishi, Shuka Brahma Rishi, that comes forth through Bhagavatam, and we see that Maitreya is also saying the same thing, that this nectar is never enough because it's so pleasing to listen to, and it is very effortlessly giving us the one-pointed devotion to the Supreme Being who is our own self. So with this beautiful prayer and glorification, Maitreya concludes this chapter on the auspicious Avatar of Varaha. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.